Hello everyone and welcome to the release webinar for Kendo UI. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us to learn about the R2 2017 release. My name is John Bristow. I'm a member of the Developer Relations team at Progress. Joining me on this webinar are my colleagues Burke and Tara, and together we'll be walking you through the latest features we've added to Kendo UI for jQuery and Kendo UI for Angular. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that all the bits we'll be showing here are available online, so make sure to fire up the TELRIC control panel to download the latest updates. Individual product updates are also available through your account page on TELRIC.com. Now, I know it can be tough to sit through an entire webinar. It's easy to get distracted or pulled away from your desk. If that happens, don't worry. This webinar is being recorded and will be available up on YouTube. You can find our channel at youtube.com/TELRIC. We'll also be answering your questions during this webinar on Twitter through the Hey Kendo UI hashtag. Make sure to use this hashtag because it will help us find your questions. Also, we'll be giving away an Xbox One S to the best question that's asked. So it's in your best interest to ask and ask often. It's also our way of thanking you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. Please note that this prize is subject to our sweepstake rules. Now, a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. First, everyone should keep an eye open for the wrap-up blog post that we'll be publishing shortly after the conclusion of today's webinar. You can find this up on our blog site, which should be your homepage, and if it's not, please subscribe to the RSS feed or bookmark it. You can find the TELRIC blog site at blogs.telric.com. And second, another bookmark-worthy site is the TELRIC Developer Network. There you'll find articles on topics that are relevant to you. Recently, we've been talking a lot about JavaScript, Angular, CSS, and a whole host of other things. You can find the TELRIC Developer Network, or TDN, at developer.telric.com. And now, on to the main part of our webinar. Kendo UI is our UI framework for building rich HTML5 and JavaScript apps for any platform, browser, or device. It features many robust controls that are beautifully themed, responsive, and integrated with libraries like jQuery and Angular. The R2 2017 release is packed with features. Let's start with Kendo UI for Angular. I'm happy to announce the public availability of Kendo UI for Angular. This marks a significant milestone in the history of Kendo UI. Built from the ground up on Angular, this release includes substantial improvements and new features of all its major components, including support for Angular 4, Bootstrap 4 themes, and more. It includes a supercharged grid with features like multi-column headers, PDF support, responsive configuration, and filtering, just to name a few. We've also added a StockChart and Sparklines to round out our extensive data visualization capabilities. Tara and Burke will walk you through these features in a moment. Kendo UI for jQuery continues to be awesome, and in this release we've added more features and improvements to make it that much more awesome. Like Kendo UI for Angular, we've added support for our new Progress Sass theme builder and a new Bootstrap 4 theme. On the widget side, we've added a ton of improvements to the grid. We've also added more events, allowing you to predefine grid sync with the data source without further user action. You can also allow the user to refresh the grid manually. A long-standing request is to improve the capabilities of the upload widget. With this release, we've added the ability to chunk files into smaller pieces, as well as directory and cloud support for backend services. We have two new widgets as well. The data input and Listbox widgets provide a boost to the data entry capabilities in form-based pages. The new data input widget provides a compact control that separates sections for days, months, years, hours, and minutes. It also supports customizing the date and time formats. The new Listbox widget displays the list of data that is contained in a box, and it allows for single and multiple selection, reordering of selected items, keyboard navigation, as well as dragging and dropping of items. We've also improved the panel bar and menu widgets. The panel bar now supports binding to local and remote data sources, as well as templates for markup generation. We've also added horizontal and vertical scrolling support to the menu, along with the ability to bind to custom attributes for data-bound items. Well, I've certainly done enough talking. Let's have Tara walk you through some of the latest features we've added to this release of Kendo UI for Angular.
We're going to use the Angular CLI to create our application. First, we need to install it using the Node Package Manager, NPM. And once that is installed, we can simply create a new Angular project with the command ng-new and our project name. The Angular CLI is fantastic, not only for generating an application, but when we're ready to add new components, services, and other parts to our application, we can use the CLI to generate them. If we move into our new projects directory and check out our package.json, we can see that the Angular CLI has set us up on the latest version of Angular. Whenever we want to take a look at our application, we can serve it up with ng-serve and go to localhost port 4200 to see that we have a working application. Now we can leave ng-serve running in the background and it will automatically update as we add new things. The only documents that we're going to be editing today for our application are in our source app directory. And here you can see those are our main component files and our main module TS file. All of our components are pieced out into separate modules that you can find at our NPM registry, so you'll want to log in to have access. I wanted to show you what it looks like if you log in and you don't have an account or you haven't confirmed your account. If you need an account, go ahead and head to TELRIC.com/login, and there is a create an account for free link at the bottom of the page. If you're still getting the error after you create your account, make sure you check your email because we do send out an activation link. Once you're all golden, you'll get this logged in message and we are ready to go. First, we'll clear this out. Then we'll use npm to install the first component we're adding to our app, which is our button component. And we'll use --save flag to add it as a dependency. We're also going to go ahead and add our internationalization package as well. You'll see that we have an unmet dependency of the Angular animations, and this is because with the release of Angular 4, they went ahead and separated out the animations to lighten the load of core and kind of make them their own package. So we'll just go ahead and npm install our Angular animations, and we're all set. So all of our packages now support Angular 4. We do recommend that you upgrade, but if you're not quite there yet, we still got you covered. So if you are developing an Angular 2 application, you can use the @ng2 tag on your module name. So for example, those two modules that we just installed, the button and the internationalization package, all we need to do to have an Angular 2 compatible version of them is to add that ng2 tag at the tail end. Once you get your module installed, whichever one you use, we have the same steps forward to include our button. And you can find more information in the documentation about the button. Today we're going to be doing the drop-down button, but let's go right into the code to gain a better understanding of what we're doing here. So we'll be working inside of our source app directory, and first we'll look at our main module TS file. This is where we'll bring in the modules that we've just installed. Since we will be using Angular animations, we'll be pulling that module in. And of course, to use the button component, we go ahead and add our buttons module. Then in order for these modules to be used, we have to include them inside of our imports array in our ng module. So we'll go ahead and save that. And now to enter the component, we'll open up our app.component.html template file to include our buttons component. Per Angular syntax, when you see the square brackets, it means that we are binding to a property. So here we're taking the drop-down buttons data property and binding it to the data variable that we will be setting. And then when you see the parentheses, it means we are binding to an event. So you see here we have our button, but we don't have the data that it's supposed to get or the event of the item click function attached to it that needs to exist to make something actually happen. So now we'll look at the HTML and the component.typescript file. In our app component, we'll export the data array of objects to bind to the data property of our drop-down button. This array will just be objects with a text property and values of fun, funner, and funnest, just to make my proper grammar coworkers crazy. Next, we create the on-button item click function that we're binding to the drop-down button's item click event. We pass the data item that was clicked, so then we're able to log out and see the text from the item that was clicked. Since we left ngserve running, Webpack has compiled everything since our last save. So when we take a look at our application, we see that we have a functioning fun button. And we can go ahead and open up our console to see that we have everything logging out as we expected. So everything was working correctly, but that button looked so crummy, I don't think anybody would actually want to use it. So let's go ahead and look into styling. Kendo UI for Angular now gives you multiple ways to add attractive styling with super easy implementation. You can check out the different styling themes and see each of the components styling, and also see the way they move and function because they're demoed on our site. This one here is our default theme, and it's a really great way for everything on your site to look uniform without having to put too much thought or work into it. We also have a Bootstrap theme for Angular all packaged up and ready for you to use. But what I'm really excited about is our new theme builder. What's great about the theme builder is it lets you take a base theme and customize it to either what your website's colors are, or maybe you have a client who already has their color palette picked out. Now all you have to do is plug in those values, and then you can simply roll up this theme. Let's check out the theme builder application. You can start out with a theme that we already have or import your own. With ours, you can choose from our default or you can choose from our Bootstrap. Since we're going to be using the default today, I'll just click on that. As soon as you're in, you can see how the components look with the default styling. There are even pre-made swatches that you can choose from. And again, you get a preview of what it all looks like, which is pretty great, especially if you're choosing your own colors and you want to make sure things don't look awful. Here we can pick an accent color with the handy color picker, maybe a nice progress green, and it automatically updates our preview. And now you can pick and choose the components you look at. The default is to have all of them open. For this, I'll just click the grid. Then you can see the grid component all by itself. Once you're all set, you just have to hit the download button and you will get an all.css file or a variable.scss for your Sass files. Then you just have to include it in your style sheets. It's really easy and really awesome. I highly recommend checking out and playing with the theme builder. For now, we'll head back to the styling page. Today, we are going to use the default theme for our application. To get started, we need to install our default theme module and save it as a dependency using the -S flag. Once we have that, we're going to go up 2 directories to find our Angular CLI JSON file. Inside there, we just need to include the path to our styles in the app's styles array. This is a long path, but at least we only have to do this once. Once we have that saved, we can serve up our project again and see that our button now looks much more presentable. And to make that difference, we only had to add 1 line of code. There are more ways to utilize the drop-down button. Definitely check those out. But now, let's move on to our most popular component, the grid. I want to take a moment to point out to you that we have demos of our components in our docs. But not only the demo, you can find the code examples there as well, with all the files. Plus, there's a link to see the code in action with Plunker. This way you can fiddle around with the code and try your own edits out. To get started with the grid, I'm going to copy this npm install script instead of making you watch me type all of it out. But I want to point out all of the components' dependencies are listed down here. Let's go ahead and run that install script. Everything that we're installing are components that can be used in our grid, like drop-downs, drawing, Excel export. We won't be able to get into those today, but check them out. The grid has tons of functionalities you can take advantage of. Like most of our components, the next step is to add it to our module file. First, import the package, then import the module. This is an easy process to remember. We use it with practically all of our components. Install, import, implement. Speaking of implement, let's see the data we're filling the grid with when we implement. These characters may look familiar. Because yes, there is in fact a Star Wars API. If you haven't heard of this, you're welcome. Now we'll open our template file to add our grid component. Let's actually keep the characters file open to use as a reference when we make our columns. We'll get rid of our fun button, and we'll add our Kendo grid component with its data property bound to items. After that, we'll start filling in the inside of our grid. Kendo grid column has a field property which will bind to one of our characters' properties. First name with a title of name for the column header. Notice we're making the field property to the exact value of the character's property. Then we'll add more columns for other properties. Most of our components have this type of cascading naming convention. So inside of Kendo grid lives Kendo grid column. We're also not going to use all of the properties for our characters. Instead, we're picking and choosing which pieces of data about our characters we're going to use in our grid. Once we have all these columns filled out, we can go ahead and save this file. Then, while keeping this template open for reference, we'll start working on our component file. First, we need to bring over our characters. And we can go ahead and delete everything that had to do with our old fun button. And all we have to do is add the items array that our grid is binding to its data property and assign it to characters. So it looks like ngserve is still doing what it's supposed to in the background, and so we can see we have a grid full of characters. I put skin types in here because I love the fact that Chewbacca's is unknown, IG88 is metal, and Admiral Akbar is brown model. It's the little joys in life, right? There are a lot of things that you can do with our grid, and you can actually put a lot of data inside there, so I think that's why today we should focus on paging, or just at least look into it and see what we can do. So to get that implemented, first we need to add more properties to our grid. Our data will now be bound to this grid view, which will pull our data in, and we'll focus on a page size, but first we're going to just assign it to a variable so we can never change it in our module. And we'll have a skip amount of how many items we want to skip. We are going to make the pageable true, and I'm also going to add selectable true so I can show you what it looks like to be able to select things. And then we're going to bind to this event the page change event. Okay, so we have all of those in our template. Now let's actually put the data into our app component in our module TypeScript file. So grid view gets assigned to grid data result, which you'll see we'll be pulling in from our module, and then we're taking data and assigning it to an object first. Then we make the page size equal to 10 because we only want 10 items per page size. So when we load that page, only 10 items are going to be pulled up. And today we're not going to skip anything. And we're going to have the constructor go ahead and load the items. So when this page is loaded, we're going to load the items immediately. But then we're also going to make this function that is attached that we've previously bound to the page change event. So we have a page change function. So when a page change occurs, it knows to skip, and then it also knows to load items. Then we're going to make our load items function. So first, this function assigns grid view, which remember we're binding to our data property in our grid, to this object that has data. And it slices the data based on how many we skipped and what our page size was to know where to start this data again. And then we also have to send it in total so that it remembers how many things we have in our array. Then we have to go back to the top and make sure that we import the parts from the grid module that we actually used, like the grid data result and the page change event. So again, those are coming from our grid module. We see that we have compiled successfully. So if we take a look at our app, we see we now have pagination. Yay! So this is great because when you want to load a lot of information into your grid, you don't want to load all of it at once. And there's our selectable working. So now I can point things out very easily. And I also want to show that this is responsive right out of the box since we have our default theme set up. So we have all of our pagination set up, our selectable true set up. We have all of this grid from basically adding our data and setting a few properties. And again, there is so much that you can do with this grid so that we are completely skimming the surface. So check out the API and the documentations to see all the components and all the fun you can have with our component library.
Thanks, Tara. I'm stoked we've hit version 1 of Kendo UI for Angular. The components look awesome, and I especially love the new Sass theme builder and Bootstrap 4 theme we've added. Of course, a supercharged grid component is always great to have in an application. Now, Kendo UI for Angular doesn't stop there. As I've mentioned before, we've also added some new charts to our latest release. Here's Tara again to show them off.
We have some really great features coming in with our chart components. So first, let's take a look at our Sparkline. As you can see here in the demo, these charts are inline and compact, but still give us a lot of interactive data. Let's go ahead and jump into the code to set one up. We'll make a new project for separation concerns, or moreover so Tara doesn't get confused. But we'll go ahead and make that. And then we'll install all of the dependencies we need. And you can find these on the charts overview page. So we'll go ahead and install those. So this is the only charts module that you'll need for the charts. So we'll be looking at the stock chart later, and that one will use this same dependency. So we only have to install this once. Let's look at our source app files and start out with our app.module.ts file. For transition animations, we'll add the browser animations module that we get from Angular. Then we'll add our charts module that we just installed from Progress. And we'll import our Hammer.js for gestures. Per usual, we'll add the charts module to our imports, and this time we'll also add the browser animations module. Then we'll save that, open up our components HTML template file, and delete all the things. So first we'll add a nice little header, and then this is where we will first make our paragraph and then add our Sparkline component. So here it just feeds in the data, and we'll attach that to bar data, and then the type, the series type, which is column. We'll close out that component and put some more words at the end of it to see what that looks like. And then we'll duplicate this to now put a pie graph in. So we just need to change the data to bind it to the pie data and change the type to pie. And that is pretty much it. Obviously we need an emoji. I didn't close that out actually, so there we go. Then going into our main app.component TypeScript file, we just need to create those data arrays to attach to our charts. So first the bar data, then now this pie data. Just put any random numbers so we can get some data into our charts. So if we go ahead and serve that up, we can see that we have our interactive Sparkline charts. Now let's look at the stock chart. I don't know that much about stocks, but I do know that the stock chart has a bunch of interactions that really let you look into and control the visualization of the price movement for any financial instrument. So let's go ahead and make a new project with ng new again. Once we have that spun up, I want to go into the folder and look at our application files, first with the module.ts. And again, we're adding the browser animations module so that we have all of those transitions. And if you saw when the page loaded in the stock chart overview, when the stock chart renders, you get to see a lot of the movement. So again, we add our stock chart module that we get from Progress, and we're also going to add this service, which we'll touch on later. But basically, the service is going to bring in all the stock information that we have saved up. And then we're going to import an operator, a map operator from RxJS, and import Hammer.js again for those gestures. As always, we go ahead and add all of the modules that we need to our imports. Oh, and I just noticed that this is actually a JSONP module that we're adding here, and that's also from Angular. So now we're going to go into our HTML template file again, and instead of coding all of this out, since we're a little short on time, I'm just going to show you what this looks like here. We have our Kendo stock chart component. Per usual, we start to do a cascading thing where we have the Kendo chart series and the Kendo chart series item. And so that part is basically the chart that you're seeing. So it knows that it's a stock chart, and then we give it the different properties like the type and the data binding in different fields. Below that, we have the Kendo chart navigator, and that's the area chart below the data chart that you were seeing that you were able to manipulate to choose what time frame you wanted to dig into. So now we're going to look at our project's main, or our component's main TypeScript file. And we're used to this setup after seeing it a few times now, that we are assigning data to an empty array, and then from and to dates, and then in the constructor is where we're going to use that stock data service to assign our stock data to our data array, which is bound to our chart. Let's go ahead and serve this up. And voila, we have our amazing stock chart. Extremely interactive, very easy to set up, pretty awesome. Now, so let me show you what that data looks like. So in this file, we're basically pulling that data through, and this is the data that we're feeding in. It's a simple array of objects with those stock prices. But again, I don't know that much about stocks, so if you do, give this a shot and let me know what you think. I would love to hear your feedback.
Thanks, Tara. As a fan of data visualization, I love it when we can add capabilities to a framework to draw pretty pixels to the screen in the form of charts and graphs. Those components look awesome. In addition to the components you just saw, it's important to note that Kendo UI for Angular also supports framework features like ahead-of-time compilation and tree shaking. This is part of the work that we've done to building these native Angular components. Here's Burke showing off what it looks like in a custom app that he's built.
So I have an application here that pulls from the iTunes API that I've not so creatively named Kendo UI Tunes. It uses Bootstrap, it uses Angular, and it uses Kendo UI for Angular. So we can go ahead and search for an artist here. You can notice that as we type, artist results are returned. So we'll pick one. And then we get a Kendo UI grid over on the right. This grid's got paging, so we can move through the albums. And additionally, we can sort the albums. Now, one interesting thing here is that we can expand the album, and there's another grid inside. So this is called a details grid. And inside we have, of course, the tracks that correspond to the album. This is a master detail scenario. Now we can go ahead and play one of these tracks. You'll notice when I do, that changes from a play to a pause button. If I was to come and play a different track, this pause button will change back to a play button because it's no longer the active track. So let's do that. There we go. That's all controlled by an Angular service. This is one of my favorite bands, by the way. They're called Claypex. You should check them out. Great music to code to. This app's also responsive. So if I go over and start pulling it in, you'll see everything stacks really nicely and the grid just kind of breathes down below. Really cool stuff. And additionally, we can just take out the search result and the grid will occupy the whole space. Had a lot of fun putting this demo together, so check that out. You can grab the source code on GitHub. Now, if we take a look at this application, I'm just going to pop open the developer tools here and I'll amp up the size a bit so we can see. I'm going to go to the network tab and I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. And let's see if we can get enough space here to see. Might have to back the size back down. We've actually got 5.1 megabytes that we've transferred across the wire here. That is huge considering what this application does. Why is that the case? Well, if we go back and we look through the files, we'll see a bunch of different files in here, but this vendor.bundle.js is the main culprit, 4.3 of the 5.1 megabytes. It's just massive. What's in the vendor.js bundle? Well, the vendor bundle contains things like Angular. It contains Kendo UI for Angular, things like RxJS. And there's a lot of unused and unnecessary code in there, and there's also the code that isn't minified in there. That's why this file is so big. What we could do is take advantage of some of the build items like ahead of time compilation, like tree shaking on the Angular CLI to make this smaller. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to check out ahead of time compilation. So I'm going to jump back over to the CLI here, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the server that I've got running. And what I want to do is I want to start and kick off some ahead of time compilation. So what ahead of time compilation is going to do is it's going to take our files and the templates, it's going to compile those down. Now, here's what I mean by that. Let me kick this off. We'll jump back over to Visual Studio Code. This is the album component .html. So this is the template that renders out the grid of albums. You can see we have a Kendo grid in here. We have all the attributes that are bound. And then inside of the grid, we have the tracks, and you'll see that as well. So what ahead of time compilation is going to do is it's going to take this template and turn it into JavaScript, because that's how Angular works. It doesn't actually execute this HTML when it gets to the browser. It takes this HTML, turns it into JavaScript, and then that's what the browser executes. What ahead of time compilation does is it takes this step out so that when it's already compiled when it gets to the browser. So the browser simply has to execute it. It doesn't also have to compile it. So let's jump over here and I'll show you what I mean. If we look at our files, we've now got an AOT folder inside. If we go into AOT and we look at our source, I'm going to go into album, and this is our album component. Now, it's not going to look the same. In fact, it's not even readable by us as humans. But what we've got in here is everything that we need for this component to function. If we scroll down enough, you'll see that the template has been inlined as well. Here it is right here. So this is Angular turning the template into JavaScript, something that can be immediately executed in the browser. So now that we have ahead of time compilation enabled, we can do other things like check for template errors. So if we go back to our app component.html, let's say we make a template error in here, like, I don't know, we forgot to close the tag. And then we go over here and we rerun this ahead of time compilation step. What'll happen is it'll error out at build time and tell us, nope, you got an error, you're missing a closing tag. So let's go back over, we'll add that back, and then our ahead of time compilation will succeed. Now I'm sort of running this command here. You may have seen me pasting it in node modules /bins. You don't have to know all of that. The folks on the Angular CLI team have done such a great job with this. All we have to do is drop down and say that we want to build this. We want to do AOT, and we want to make it a prod instance. Now, when we do this, Angular is going to go through. It's going to do the ahead of time compilation step for you. But not only that, it's also going to use Webpack to do tree shaking, and then it's going to minify all of the files. This is essentially optimizing all of your code in one single step. Really, the only thing that you could do in addition to this would be to gzip it on the server, and that would be the smallest that you could possibly get it, but this is getting you almost all the way there. And I know that the Angular team is working on making tree shaking even better in Angular, so looking forward to that. Now, once this is built, we'll get a dist folder over here in our project. So let's take a look here. Not under source. If we come up, we have a dist folder right there, just popped in. If we look in the dist folder, we'll see all of the files that are going to be used to run the application. So the entire application, that's it, down to just these few files. So let's do this. I'm going to come over here and let's move into the dist directory. And then I'm just going to run a little program called Light Server from John Papa. Excellent little utility for a quick web server. And this is going to fire up, and now we've got the same application, but this time it's been fully optimized. If we go back here and we take a look at our sources now, you can see we're now down to 1.4 megabytes. So we've decreased this thing by almost 4 megabytes, just like that. And if we go back up and find our vendor file, here it is. You can see the sucker's now 765 kilobytes. It was up at over 4 megabytes before. So this is the power of native Angular components working with Angular and working with the CLI to provide you the fastest, most efficient applications possible.
Awesome stuff, Burke. It's great to see how Kendo UI for Angular and the Angular CLI work together to bring you incredible features like the ones demonstrated. Thanks. Let's now switch gears and talk about Kendo UI for jQuery. Kendo UI for jQuery is our UI framework for building rich HTML5 and JavaScript apps for any platform, browser, or device. It features over 70 robust controls that are beautifully themed, responsive, and easy to integrate with popular JavaScript libraries. In this release, we've implemented over 43 feature requests and closed more than 47 bugs. Here are just a few of the highlights. Kendo UI for jQuery now has a new Sass-based theme builder. This tool enables you to create or modify themes so they match your web app design through custom themes or one of the many predefined themes that ship with Kendo UI for jQuery. You can also import a theme matching your existing corporate branding and tweak it to match your requirements. Speaking of themes, the new Bootstrap 4 theme for Kendo UI for jQuery allows you to blend in and complement Bootstrap components. You can then modify the Sass through the theme builder to see how they affect the look of the components in real time. Switching to widgets now. We have added numerous features to the grid to customize its behavior and design. Specifically, we've added more events to support scenarios requested by customers, such as allowing the predefined sync for the data source integration without further user action. We've also added some finishing touches to the grid itself, such as allowing users to refresh the grid manually, adding finishing touches like a progress bar for long-running save operations, and styled checkboxes in column editors. Kendo UI for jQuery also features 2 new widgets, the Listbox and Date Input. These widgets are nice additions to the collection of widgets used for forms. The Listbox is a widget that displays a list of items. It allows for multiple selection of items, reordering and transfer between the 2 list boxes, and drag and drop, of course, is fully supported as well. You can easily control the appearance by arranging the buttons in different layouts or changing their text. The Date Input widget allows you to enter date-time values via direct input. It provides separate sections for day, month, year, hours, and minutes. Furthermore, you can customize the date and time format. Another widget that's getting a big update in this release is the Upload widget. We've added the ability to chunk upload of large files. This includes the ability to pause and resume uploads. These uploads are conducted asynchronously with multiple requests to the server, and this process can be finely tuned as well through configuration settings like auto retry, max retries, and the number of concurrent connections. We've also added the ability to upload client-side directories as well. And finally, the menu widget has been improved to support scrolling, binding to custom attributes, and context-based menus via MVVM. Let's take a look at these new features in action. The Progress Sass theme builder for Kendo UI is a web application that enables you to create new or customize existing themes. You can now use the Progress Sass theme builder by visiting themebuilder.telric.com. Once there, you'll be able to select a product that you wish to target. We'll choose Kendo UI for jQuery. We can then choose to import an existing theme and modify it or create one from scratch. Let's create a new theme using the Bootstrap 4 theme as a base. As you can see, the theme builder provides an interactive view of all widgets found in Kendo UI for jQuery. Here, you can get a better sense of the design along with its look and feel. I can modify the brand colors or pick from a list of swatches. I can also limit the scope of this theme to those widgets that I wish to target, thereby reducing the size of my style sheet. When I'm happy with the changes I've made, I'll click on the Download button, which will provide a zip archive. It contains the generated style files that I can incorporate into my web app. Let's move on to one of the more popular widgets in Kendo UI for jQuery, the grid. The grid widget is a powerful control for displaying data in a tabular format. It provides many options, such as paging, sorting, filtering, grouping, and editing, which determine the way data is presented and manipulated. The grid can be bound to local or remote data through the data source component. In this release of Kendo UI for jQuery, we made a number of improvements to the grid. For starters, we've added a new persist selection property to the grid configuration. This allows you to persist the row selection after data operations like sorting, paging, filtering, and others are performed. Historically, you would implement this functionality yourself, but it required you to define handlers for the change and data-bound events on the set selected rows. Now it's encapsulated in a Boolean configuration property. One side note, using selection persistence requires a data source with an ID field for its model. We've also made a few minor improvements to the grid user experience as well. We now have a unified theme for HTML inputs in the grid. For example, you'll notice that the checkboxes match the existing theme. We also show a progress bar when a save operation is conducted over the wire. Let's demonstrate this by opening up the Chrome Developer Tools and set the throttling rate to something very slow. Now when I perform updates to cell entries and persist them back to the server, a progress bar is displayed. Now the grid has a lot of events that can be handled. This gives you better visibility into what's happening under the covers when operations are conducted against it. In our latest release, we've added a few more events into the mix. These include before edit, cell close, column menu open, and filter menu open. Let's see how this works. Here I have a pre-populated grid with a bunch of event handlers wired up. As you can see, I've added handlers in my configuration for the new events we've added. As I perform these operations, their events are triggered and I can respond accordingly to them. Again, this should give you better visibility into what's happening under the covers when these operations are conducted against the grid. The listbox and date input are two new widgets in Kendo UI for jQuery. They complement the growing list of form controls available for collecting user input. Let's see how these operate. I'll start with a collection of items within a select element. Beside it, I have another select element which is empty for the purposes of collecting selected items. To convert this to a list box, I'll target the select element and call Kendo Listbox. For configuration, I'll target the empty select element as a connected listbox control and provide any array of options to represent which operations I would like to perform or provide to my users. Here I can specify options like move up, move down, transfer to, transfer from, and so on. Finally, I'll call Kendo Listbox on the connected control. Refreshing the page allows us to see the impact of this code. Here, the listbox with its associated operations I specified earlier in its configuration is displayed. The listbox supports a number of features, including drag and drop, custom templates, and a rich API. Now let's see the date input in action. It's a simple but effective widget that enables you to enter date-time values via direct input. It provides separate sections for day, month, year, hours, and minutes. Furthermore, you can customize the date-time format. As you can see in this example, creating a date input is easy. Simply call Kendo Date Input on the target input element. Let's now check out the Upload widget and chunk upload support. This was a highly requested feature from customers, so I'm super excited to show off this capability. Here I have a web page with an upload widget present on the page. I'll go ahead and select a file to upload to the server, and you'll notice that a dialog is displayed that allows me to track its progress. I can pause the upload and even cancel it if I wish. Let's take a look at the underlying markup and code for this page. Here I'm initializing the upload widget with a configuration that supports asynchronous operation. I've indicated that I'd like a chunk size of 11 kilobytes to the URL denoted here. Let's switch back to the browser and watch this demo again through the developer tools. As you can see, we're pushing XHRs to the save endpoint in 11 kilobyte chunks. This feature is great for scenarios where the user wishes to upload large files. Let's take a look at another demo. This time, the upload widget here has been configured to support a directory upload through the Boolean value you see here. This demo also supports the ability to select and drop a directory over the control for the same outcome. This feature is only supported by browsers that support the HTML5 directory and data transfer item API. Finally, we've updated the menu widget with additional features. In this example, you can see that the number of menu items exceeds the space that's available to render them. In this case, we can specify the Boolean config value scrollable to true, and the menu will allow you to hover over the right and left sides of the widget to see more options. This works with the menu widget in both a horizontal and a vertical orientation. Now, there's one more thing that I'd like to talk about, and that's Progress Telerik Reporting, our complete reporting solution for web, desktop, and mobile apps. Now, you might be wondering why it's worth mentioning during a webinar on Kendo UI. Well, as it turns out, TELRIC Reporting uses Kendo UI as part of its client-side delivery. With the R2 2017 release of Kendo UI for Angular, the engineering team for TELRIC Reporting has been working incredibly hard to take advantage of it. That's why I'm tremendously excited to announce our new Angular report viewer that's based on Kendo UI for Angular. This component can be integrated into Angular applications out of the box with both Webpack and System.js module loaders. Let's take a quick look at the new Angular 4-based report viewer. I have a report already set up that contains the report viewer component. I'll use the Angular CLI to process the application and host it on localhost. For those of you who have seen our reporting solution in the past, this will look very familiar. The main difference here being the fact that I'm using the new Angular 4-based report viewer. Jumping back to my project, let's bring up the HTML document that uses our report viewer component. I have a directive here called trViewer with a number of bound properties and events. This viewer is using the remotely hosted reports found up on our demo site. I can specify a number of properties, such as its view and scale modes. Using this component is no different than any other Angular component. For customers looking for the combination of using Angular with a robust reporting solution, I suggest checking out Progress Telerik Reporting. Well, that about wraps it up for us. Before we go, we want to let you know that you can install the latest bits by visiting your account page on TELRIC.com. There you'll find a button to download the TELRIC Control Panel. This utility is super useful for staying up to date on the latest versions of all of our UI controls. Live demos for Kendo UI for jQuery, Kendo UI for Angular, and many other products can be found online by visiting demos.telric.com. Please make sure to check it out. On behalf of Burke, Tara, and the rest of us at Progress, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us here for today's webinar on the R2 2017 release of Kendo UI. See you next time.